Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. Boston, 2 a.m. The blizzard hadn't stopped. The entire city was drowned in a cold white light reflected from the street lamps. Snow fell in thick sheets, blanketing rooftops, stairways, and even the dead neon signs. Only the wind scratching at window panes and the muffled crunch of footsteps on ice broke the silence. Dr. Jack Caldwell closed the door behind him. He was leaving St. Augustine Medical Center, the private clinic he had founded, after 18 straight hours of surgery. The exhaustion had drained every ounce of strength from his body, yet his eyes remained sharp, cold, utterly controlled. The gaze of a man long accustomed to staring at life and death without flinching. He pulled his coat tighter and crossed the snow-covered parking lot. Each step cracked the frozen surface beneath his shoes. In his mind, only one thought lingered: go home, shower, sleep till noon. But then, in the last pool of light at the end of the street, he saw a small figure. A girl lay collapsed beneath a lamppost, half buried in snow, her long hair wet and stuck to her cheek. At first, Jack barely glanced at her. Boston streets were full of drunks this time of year. But when the light swept across her face, he froze. Her skin was deathly pale, eyelids shut tight, breath so faint it was almost invisible. Bare fingers clutched the hem of her coat, as if gripping something unseen. The wind blew stronger, revealing faint scratches on her wrist, crimson against the white snow. He knelt. Her body temperature was so low her skin felt like glass. A shiver ran through him. He muttered under his breath, voice low and rough, "If I walk away, she'll die." Jack wasn't the kind to play hero in the middle of a winter night. He hated trouble, hated the emotions that made people act irrationally. But there was something in her silence, a kind of tightly sealed despair, that anchored his feet to the ground. He took off his coat, draped it over her, and lifted her into his arms. Her body was frighteningly light. The wind hissed past his ears, the scent of cold creeping down his collar. Snow kept falling, landing in his hair, melting into water against her neck. The ER doors burst open. Blinding white light flooded in. Nurses froze for a second when they saw the hospital director carrying an unconscious woman. "Warm her up. Start fluids. Don't ask questions." His voice was calm, but the entire room went silent. Jack lay her on the bed, watching the ECG line flicker sluggishly to life. The green pulse blinked in time with her faint, fragile breathing. He studied her closely. Dark brown hair, delicate face, a small cut on her cheek, as if someone had touched her with violence. The collar of her coat was soaked, and a faint trace of perfume drifted through the air, lingering only a moment before disappearing. He turned away. "Don't get involved." But as his hand touched the door handle, he heard a whisper behind him. "Don't let them find me." Her voice was thin, trembling, almost dissolving in the air. Jack froze, eyes fixed on the fragile figure beneath the blanket. Them. Who was she talking about? One person or an entire nightmare chasing her? He didn't answer. He simply pulled the blanket higher and walked out. The hospital corridor glowed dimly under yellow lights, the scent of antiseptic mixed with stale coffee. Jack sat on a bench, elbows on his knees, one hand covering half his face. His heartbeat was steady, yet somehow it felt offbeat. The image of the girl in the snow kept replaying in his mind. Trembling lips, tangled wet hair, bruised wrist. Someone like that. What could she be running from? Outside the glass, snow continued to fall. Inside Jack's chest, a vague feeling, one he hadn't known for a long time, spread slowly, like warmth in a cold room. He looked up at the gray sky. In that moment, he didn't know that just hours earlier, a lavish wedding in New York had been abruptly abandoned, and the woman who fled from it was now asleep in his hospital room. But that night, he knew only one thing. I just saved a stranger, and she's going to change everything. The snow fell harder. The city lay buried in silence, a beginning of destiny. White light filtered through the curtains, casting pale reflections across the cold hospital room walls. The steady beep, beep of the heart monitor echoed softly. like the fragile rhythm of someone just pulled back from the edge between life and death. Lila opened her eyes. The brightness stung her lashes. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled her lungs, making her dizzy. She tilted her head slightly, catching a glimpse of the white ceiling and faint shadows of snow beyond the glass. A silent second passed before her memories flooded back. Snow, the cold, her trembling legs. And then, darkness. She jolted upright. A mistake. The world spun, vision tilting in waves. "Careful!" The voice came from the corner. She flinched. A man stood by the window, his back half lit by dawn. He wore a white lab coat, his face carved between shadow and light. Sharp cheekbones, eyes so cold they seemed to lower the temperature of the entire room. "You collapsed in the snow," he said, voice even, unreadable. "I brought you here." She swallowed. "Where am I?" "St. Augustine Medical Center." "And you are?" "Dr. Jack Caldwell." His name was as precise and frigid as his tone, short, clipped, emotionless. Lila's fingers tightened around the blanket. "Thank you. I'm, sorry for the trouble." Jack didn't respond. His gaze lingered on her face. Pale, hair disheveled, eyes a weary gray blue that still held a faint, defiant light. The kind of look he'd seen before, impatience ready to give up but not quite willing to die. "You should be somewhere warm," he said flatly. "Not on the streets during a snowstorm." She lowered her eyes. Her voice came out as a whisper. "I have nowhere else to go." Silence. He didn't ask further. The quiet was so thick she could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, he turned away, his voice calm but distant. "Rest. I'll have a nurse check on you again." The door closed softly behind him, leaving behind a stillness heavy enough to crush the past itself. When the nurse brought her chart later, Lila was more awake. Her eyes fell on the paper, an invoice, a string of numbers stretching like a sentence. Her hand trembled. For a second, her vision blurred. "I can't pay this." Her voice cracked. "Not a single dollar." The nurse looked at her with a mix of pity and hesitation. "You could speak to Dr. Caldwell. Maybe he'll allow a payment delay." Lila shook her head. "No, I'll find a way." When Jack returned, she was sitting up, still clutching the paper. He took one glance and knew what was coming. "I'll repay this," she said, soft but resolute. "Not with money, with work." His brows drew together. "Work? I can do anything here. Clean, organize files, help the nurses. Just give me a chance to repay my debt." Jack stared at her long enough for her to feel exposed, as if he could see straight through to her bones. "You think this is a charity ward?" His voice was low, firm. Lila bit her lip. "No, I just don't want to owe the man who saved my life." Silence stretched between them. Outside, snow kept falling, its white light spilling across half her face. She looked fragile, almost transparent, yet in her eyes burned something no one expected from a lost soul. "Will." Jack exhaled slowly. "Your name?" "Lila." "Last name?" "I'd rather not say." Their eyes met, a sharp collision, like steel striking flame. "Fine, Lila. You can stay. Temporarily." He paused. "But only to repay your hospital debt." Nothing more. She lowered her head slightly. "Thank you, doctor." He didn't reply, just stood by the window, watching snow drift through the pale Boston sky. That noon, a nurse guided her through the hallway. Their reflections shimmered faintly on the glass. St. Augustine Medical Center gleamed, bright, spotless, so white it felt sterile. Lila walked under curious stares, as though she'd stepped into a world that didn't belong to her. They assigned her to the admin wing, organizing files, cleaning rooms, running errands. Each time she looked up, she caught sight of him, striding through distant corridors, steady, unsmiling. Every time their eyes met, she looked away first. He never said a word, but his gaze seemed to question what secret she was hiding behind those tired eyes. That afternoon, as she cleaned outside his office, Jack opened the door suddenly. They almost collided. She stepped back, lowering her head. "Sorry." He stopped, voice low. Be careful. Around here, everything costs more than life itself. She glanced up, a faint smile flickering across her lips. Then maybe saving me was your worst investment yet. Jack looked at her. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Then the cold returned. Do your job well. I don't need distractions. The door shut with a soft click. Lila stared at it for a long moment, gripping the mop handle until her knuckles whitened. The smile faded. I don't intend to be anyone's concern. But deep down she knew, perhaps for the first time after years of running, she had just stepped into the most dangerous place of all, the one that could make her heart start beating again. The first morning at her new job, Boston was still freezing, as if snow had forgotten how to melt. Lila stood in a long hallway lined with white tiles, holding a stack of files nearly as tall as her head. The scent of disinfectant mixed with roasted coffee made her dizzy. Each step echoed with a sharp click, bouncing off the glossy walls until she could almost see her reflection trembling in them. On every door, the doctors' names were engraved in silver. She, the janitor, only had a paper badge that read, "Temporary staff in pen." She lowered her head, wiped the sweat off her brow, and whispered to herself, "Just work. Don't let anyone notice." But it's hard not to be noticed when you're the stranger in a place built for perfection, the nurses whispered as she passed. Who let her in here? I heard she doesn't even have a degree. Must know someone up top. Each word slid across her skin like a shard of glass. Lila pretended not to hear, kept mopping the floor, sorting files and bringing coffee to HR. Her hands had gone rough, her knuckles stung from the cleaning chemicals, but at least this was the price of survival. Jack walked down the hall just as she bent to pick up a scattered pile of papers. His shadow stretched long over the white floor, his steps firm and decisive. He didn't speak. He only glanced at her. Cold, deep, but not unfeeling. By the time she stood up, he had already passed, leaving behind a faint trail of cologne mixed with antiseptic, a scent both clean and suffocatingly distant. At lunch, she sat alone in the break room. Her meal was just a cold sandwich. Outside, the sound of heels and laughter echoed. The nurses again, talking about Jack. Dr. Caldwell just landed another big contract. He's the kind of man who never smiles. Lila smiled faintly to herself. I know. I've seen that look before. The look of a man who once pulled her from the snow. Cold, sharp, but with something unnamed buried deep beneath. That afternoon, as she pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor, a young nurse came up and deliberately bumped her shoulder. The tray of tools clattered to the floor, metal ringing against the tiles like ripples through the sterile hall. Look what you've done, the nurse sneered. This place isn't for people who can't control their hands. Lila dropped to her knees, trembling, gathering the scattered scissors and syringes one by one. She wanted to apologize, but her throat locked tight. The hallway began to buzz with murmurs, an audience watching a play they already knew the ending to. Then that voice cut through the air. If she dropped it, I'll pick it up. Everyone turned. Jack stood at the end of the corridor, white coat billowing slightly, hands in his pockets, eyes sharp as a scalpel. No one dared to speak. He walked over, picked up a pair of scissors from the floor, and placed them back on her tray. The gesture was simple, but in that thick silence, it struck like thunder. She's working, he said. No one has the right to humiliate someone who's working. His voice wasn't loud, but every word carried enough coldness to make others bow their heads. The young nurse flushed red, muttered an apology, and took a step back. Lila stayed kneeling, fingers gripping the scissors tightly. When she looked up, her eyes met his, no longer cold, but quiet, deep, with something that made her heartbeat falter. I'm sorry, she whispered. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then turned away. Be careful not to get hurt. No one here will take responsibility for you. The glass door closed behind him. For the rest of the afternoon, the ward was unusually quiet. No one whispered anymore. But Lila knew, from that moment on, she had drawn everyone's attention, including the ones she feared most. Late at night, while cleaning the offices, she saw him through the glass. Jack sat at his desk, the yellow light catching the line of his jaw. On the table lay patient files. an untouched cup of coffee, and his eyes fixed on nothing, as if what he was dissecting wasn't a body, but his own thoughts. She stood still for a long moment, hand pressed against the cold glass, heart pounding. "Don't let him see you," she whispered. "He can read what you're too afraid to say." She turned away, leaving behind the faint print of her hand on the glass, the only imperfection in that painfully white world. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, Jack looked up, his gaze catching the blur of her fingerprint. For some reason, for the first time in years, he felt something stir. Not anger, but warmth. "Lila." He murmured her name softly, like a secret melting on the edge of snow. Boston's night was as still as a blank canvas. Snow fell in slow, heavy waves, wet and thick, blurring the streetlights into soft halos. The wind sliced across her skin, carrying the metallic tang of frozen iron and the faint haze of exhaust fumes dissolving into fog. Lila walked slowly along the sidewalk, her hands tucked deep inside the pockets of her thin coat. She'd stayed late, long after her shift, helping the night nurse organize the chaotic files in the admin room. She didn't know where she was going, only that her footsteps left deep prints in the snow, then disappeared. The city was silent. Only the wind spoke, and the echo of her own loneliness followed with every breath. She looked up. The sky was white, blinding. Headlights from passing cars cut through the air like blades. Everything blurred, and in her head, a single phrase kept repeating, "Don't let them find me." A car turned the corner too fast. Headlights flashed straight into her eyes. Lila froze. The screech of brakes tore through the night. Snow scattered like shards of glass. Before she could react, a strong hand pulled her back. She fell, straight into a pair of solid arms. Heat rushed through her like fire in the cold. His breath brushed her cheek. She could hear her heartbeat crashing in her ears. "Trying to die again?" The voice was deep, cold, trembling faintly, as if holding back a storm of anger. "Jack." She looked up. Under the streetlight, snowflakes clung to his hair, melting on his shoulders. His face was sharp, composed as always, but his eyes, they weren't entirely cold this time. I didn't see the car," she whispered. "You didn't see anything," he murmured, voice cutting like the wind. "Not even the fact that you almost vanished again." She stayed silent, her face lowered, breath thin and uneven. Jack exhaled, long and heavy. Without another word, he unwrapped the scarf from his neck, a thick gray wool one, still carrying his warmth, and wrapped it around her throat. The motion was firm, but strangely gentle. "Keep it, or next time I won't save you." His voice was steady, yet his hand hesitated when it brushed her neck. Her skin was ice, his breath hot and short. For a fleeting second, there were only a few inches between them, and Boston itself seemed to stop breathing. She wanted to give it back, but he had already turned away. His footprints cut a straight, decisive path through the snow. Lila stood watching, motionless. The scarf still held his warmth. The faint scent of cedar wood and black coffee lingered around her neck. His scent, calm, rich, dangerous. Her fingers traced the soft wool, as if touching something forbidden. "Thank you," she whispered, though he was already gone, swallowed by the white mist. The next morning, St. Augustine gleamed as bright and sterile as ever. But for Lila, everything felt changed. The scarf he had wrapped around her neck was still there, hidden beneath her coat, a secret she refused to let go. Every time she bent down to wipe the floor or sorted through files, she caught a trace of his scent again. Just enough to make her pulse stumble. Jack never mentioned that night. But during the morning meeting, when he passed her in the hallway, his gaze paused for half a heartbeat, and she knew he remembered. In the cold, white world of St. Augustine, only one thing carried warmth: a strand of gray wool. By afternoon, snow began to fall again outside the glass windows. Lila stopped by the coffee counter, her fingers hovering above the cups. A nurse passed by, glancing at her with a wry smile. "Don't think he cares, honey. Dr. Caldwell doesn't know how to love anyone." Lila smiled faintly, saying nothing. She didn't believe he loved, but she knew. Last night, his hands, his breath, his eyes. None of that belonged to a man without feeling. She adjusted the scarf gently around her neck. Light spilled through the window, turning the gray threads golden. There in the reflection, she saw herself, small, trembling, but alive. And somewhere between them, something had begun. Fragile, warm, and dangerous as the snow beginning to melt. Rumors travel faster than the winter wind. Inside St. Augustine, where everything was white and cold, nothing stirred the staff's hearts more than a small story. Dr. Caldwell and the strange girl. They said he'd saved her twice. They said he looked at her differently. They said the man who never smiled had begun to care. Lila heard it all. She never reacted, just kept mopping floors, sorting files, bowing politely as if she hadn't heard a word. Yet sometimes amid the whispers, she could still feel his gaze, cold, silent, and deep as midnight water, brushing past her. The only person in the hospital who didn't look at her with curiosity was Hannah Park, a young Korean nurse with quick hands and a kind heart. That afternoon, while Lila was organizing papers in the storage room, Hannah brought 2 cups of coffee. "One for you. I'm guessing you skipped breakfast again." Lila smiled as she accepted it. "Thank you. How did you know?" "You always get here before everyone else. People like that usually forget themselves." Hannah smiled softly, her eyes gently curved. She didn't ask where Lila came from or why she was here. In a hospital full of gossip, Hannah's silence was the kindest thing. The next morning when Lila entered the office, a cup of hot coffee was already waiting on the desk. No note, no message, just black coffee, the exact kind she always secretly inhaled each morning. She looked around. The hallway was empty. At the far end, Jack walked by, hands in his coat pockets, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the white floor. Steam still rose from the cup, curling into the cold morning air. Lila smiled faintly. "Thank you, doctor," she whispered, though he wasn't there to hear it. At noon, while she was filing records, Jack appeared. No knock, no warning, just the tall figure, the faint scent of mint and black coffee. "Have you eaten breakfast?" She startled. "What? Breakfast? Did you eat?" She blinked, then gave a quiet laugh. "Does Dr. Caldwell check on every employee like this?" He paused for a beat, his eyes deep and still. "No, only the ones I don't understand." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Lila looked at him, the man known for his coldness, now standing here asking the smallest, simplest thing. "I don't need anyone to understand me," she said softly. "Good," he replied, voice low, "because I'm not good at understanding people." That afternoon, Hannah pulled her aside from the main hallway. "Lila, they're talking again." "I know. Are you okay?" Lila nodded. "They'll get tired eventually. Rumors have a shelf life." Hannah pressed her lips together. "If they go too far, tell me. I'll speak to the head nurse." "It's fine." Layla smiled, her eyes gentle as snowlight. "I'm used to it." From a distance, Jack walked down the hall, pausing when he saw them. Hannah grinned. "The man who doesn't smile is looking again." Late afternoon, the hallway was quiet. Lila gathered the files, hearing the even rhythm of leather shoes approaching. Jack stopped by the window where she stood. Outside, snow blanketed the city. The golden light reflected in his eyes. "You don't need to listen to them," he said, voice low as a tide. "I'm not listening. Just a little tired." He was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "If you're tired, I'll tell them to stop." She turned toward him. "You can't make them stop, doctor. They'll only stop when there's something else to talk about." He tilted his head slightly, his lips curving, almost into his first smile. "Then I'll give them something else to talk about." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Don't know yet," he said, voice low and dangerous, like a promise. That night when she came back, the coffee cup was there again. This time a small note rested beside it, neatly written. "Don't stay cold. Jay." She touched the paper. The scent of coffee mingled with the faint trace of his scarf still clinging to her neck. Hannah noticed, grinning mischievously. "Looks like the man who doesn't smile is starting to learn." Lila smiled softly, eyes drifting toward the snow-covered glass. "Yeah, but he picked the wrong person to learn with." Snow fell outside the window, blurred like smoke. Inside, amid the white frozen world of St. Augustine, there was a man who had once locked his heart away and a strange girl who was making it start to thaw. Boston held its breath. Snow drifted softly beyond the hospital window, and the light from St. Augustine painted the walls in a lifeless white. The pharmacy lights had been dimmed, leaving only Lila finishing the last of the shelves stacked high with glass vials. The sharp scent of antiseptic burned her eyes. She bent down to reach a lower rack. Then the world tilted. A wave of dizziness crashed through her. A metal tray hit the floor with a sharp clang, and then darkness. When Lila opened her eyes, the ceiling above her blurred into pools of white light. Beside her sat Jack, one hand steadying the IV line, his face shadowed with something rare for him. Anger mixed with worry. Emotions that didn't belong on a face were usually carved from stone. Trying to challenge death again? His voice was deep, hoarse, but quieter than usual, as if he was afraid his words might break her. Lila tried to smile weakly. "I just stood up too fast." Jack sighed, his hand still resting against her wrist. "Have you eaten anything today?" "I'm not hungry." "That's the problem. You never get hungry at the right time. You just forget to live." Her eyes blurred again. In that moment, he wasn't the powerful doctor Boston worshipped. He was just a man, tired, haunted, terrified that he wouldn't be able to save another soul. He started to stand, but something small slipped from the pocket of her coat and rolled across the tile floor. Metal glinted under the sterile light. Jack stooped to pick it up. A ring, silver. The engraving is fine and delicate, AS plus LB. He turned it between his fingers. The metal cold, heavier than it looked. AS. His tone was measured, but his eyes were anything but calm. "Who is that?" No answer. Lila's gaze locked on the ring, her breath catching. Jack looked up, and for the first time, he saw fear. Real fear. "Lila," he said quietly, voice like steel drawn from its sheath. "Who is AS?" The silence stretched long as winter. Then she whispered, her voice breaking. "The man I ran away from." Jack froze. "Ran away?" "My fiancé," she said, tears gathering. "I was forced into it. A marriage I didn't want. It was all a deal between my family and his." Her voice cracked. Every word felt like raindrops against glass. "I ran away in the middle of the wedding." "The ring, it's the only thing I didn't have time to leave behind." Jack said nothing. Light flickered across his face, half shadow, half glare. The room sank into an uneasy quiet. Only the faint tick, tick of the IV filled the air, counting the fragile seconds between them. "Who is he?" he asked finally. "Arthur Sterling." The name hung heavy in the air, cold, sharp, and gilded. A name Jack recognized from headlines. The heir to Sterling Holdings, New York's golden investment empire. He looked at her slowly, his eyes darkening. "You're telling me you ran away from a Sterling wedding?" She nodded faintly. A tear slipped down her cheek and disappeared into the pillow. "I couldn't be his bride. I didn't love him. And her voice faltered. "They wanted the marriage to cover a scandal. I was just a piece on their chessboard." Jack took a step back, the ring still in his hand. The silver gleamed faintly against his skin. "And you've been running ever since?" "Yes." He tightened his grip on the ring. In that moment, every contradiction, every mystery, every guarded silence she'd carried suddenly made sense. The girl he'd thought was a nameless drifter was in truth someone fleeing a world where power crushed people without remorse. Jack lowered his gaze, then set the ring gently on the table. His voice came rough, almost tender in its restraint. "You know, I used to think I understood what it meant to lose freedom. Turns out I knew nothing." Her tears trembled on her lashes. "I don't want anyone caught in this with me. If they find out I'm still alive..." He cut her off, voice firm, deep as thunder. "If they come here, they'll have to go through me first." Lila broke, not from fear, but from the ache of hearing someone say that. Someone who believed her existence was worth protecting. Jack didn't comfort her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, silent, unyielding. Yet in that cold stillness, Lila felt a strange warmth rise within her, the only warmth she'd known in a world built on lies. Outside, the snow continued to fall, And in that small, sterile pharmacy, two souls, one running, one frozen, shared a secret powerful enough to change both their lives. A month passed like a quiet stretch of frozen water, days of surgeries, paperwork, and silent moments when Jack stood watching the city beneath a thin veil of snow. Then one gray afternoon, as if the sky itself had decided to bear witness to the return of an old world, the glass door of the clinic burst open and walked in a man whose face was all too familiar from the papers. Andrew Sterling. He moved like an avalanche made of fabric and money, tailored coat, tight knot on his tie, polished shoes reflecting the hallway lights. The cold aura around him made the small space feel suddenly suffocating. The receptionists exchanged glances, phones quietly slipping into pockets. Whispers spread like disinfectant stirred in the air. Lila was polishing glasses in the staff lounge, her hands trembling more from unease than from cold. When the door swung open, she looked up, and her heart dropped straight to the polished shoes of that man. He walked straight to the counter, not looking at anyone else. Each step struck like a hammer against her chest. Lila, his voice was ice. No question, just a declaration prepared in advance. The whole room stopped breathing. He didn't need to ask. He claimed her name as ownership, with a gaze sharp enough to slice the air. "You're my wife, Lila." Hearing it from his mouth wasn't a reminder of affection. It sounded like a courtroom verdict echoing through the silence. Jack rose from the duty desk, his white coat perfectly pressed, his eyes still showing fatigue from the last surgery, yet now sharp as a scalpel. He walked forward, placing himself between Lila and the man from her past. His body became a barrier, steel without sound. "She's no longer yours." Jack's voice was short, every word carving an unbreakable line. It wasn't romantic defiance, it was pure defense, solid as concrete. Andrew smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Jack Black? Doctor at St. Augustine?" He weighed the name like currency. "The one famous for difficult operations. I've heard of you." His laugh rolled like a stone across frozen ground. "A man who dares to stand between me and what's mine." Interesting. Jack didn't flinch. For a moment, the hospital corridor turned into an arena. Fluorescent lights hissed. The ceiling seemed to lower. Staff gathered behind them, eyes flickering between fear and fascination. Lila stood behind Jack, gripping the hem of her apron, her heart pounding as if begging to scream that she would never go back. Andrew pulled a business card from his coat and tossed it onto the counter like a Christmas medal. The paper slid across the shiny surface and stopped beside a stethoscope. "Andrew Sterling, Sterling Holdings." "She's a disgrace," he said, his voice honed like a blade. "A liability to my family. When I take her back, you'll lose everything." The threat didn't need details. The weight of power spoke for itself. Companies, shares, contracts, a network strong enough to crush anyone's career or life. A quiet breath rippled through the bystanders. A few exchanged glances, the wary respect of professionals facing money's reach. The glass door reflected the scene. Two men, one in a white coat, one in a $1,000 suit, and between them, a woman small as a candle flame. Jack picked up the cards slowly, as if reading both their fates. He met Andrew's eyes unblinking. "She's not an object for you to reclaim. And this isn't a casino where you trade people for assets." His tone was level, but beneath it simmered a fury that made everyone take a step back. Andrew's smile turned thinner, colder, like he was looking at a nuisance to be erased. "You misunderstand, Doctor. I'm not claiming her for sentimental reasons. I'm claiming her to restore my family's reputation, to bury mistakes that could destroy us. And if you interfere, if you make this difficult, I'll show you what it means to lose everything." He nodded toward the admin office. An unspoken warning of legal pressure, media leaks, letters of boycott that could fall like acid rain. Lila stepped forward, her voice rough. "I've chosen. I'm not going back." Each word stabbed her own heart, but she spoke them with rare certainty, paid for by nights of hiding and the conviction that freedom was worth the cost. Andrew looked at her, face unchanged except for the flash of cold light in his eyes. "Your freedom is a luxury I can afford." Then he turned, the shine of his suit catching the sterile light. "This isn't a plea, Lila," he said before leaving. It's an order. The door closed behind him like the snap of a contract about to be torn apart. The hallway filled again with footsteps, soft voices, the hum of routine returning. Lila sat down, her head in her hands, not from panic this time, but from exhaustion that reached the bone. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, firm enough to comfort, gentle enough not to cross the line. They won't come right away, but if they try... He paused, letting the meaning settle in the silence. I'll be here. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the new footprints. Inside St. Augustine, a boundary had been drawn. This was no longer a simple escape. It was a quiet war between the power of money and the resolve of a woman who chose freedom, and Jack, with the calloused hands of his trade, had chosen to stand on her side. Rumors don't need wind to spread. All it takes is one photo, one cheap headline, and the silence of those who enjoy watching a man fall. Billionaire doctor entangled with runaway sterling bride. Scandal at St. Augustine. Who is Jack Caldwell's mysterious woman? By morning, Boston's newspapers were blazing with it. The immaculate white walls of St. Augustine, the symbol of purity and precision, now felt tainted. Curious eyes followed him. Phones lifted discreetly, whispers slithered through the hallways like cold wind through an unlatched door. The board demanded an internal review. Investors wanted clarity. And in tense meetings strung tight as wire, Jack sat upright, face expressionless, his gray-blue eyes calm as a lake before a storm. He didn't defend himself. He didn't apologize. He said only one thing: I don't deny it. That night, Lila stood alone before the tall glass windows, the city below glowing like a wounded heart. Every headline, every cruel comment cut into her like glass. She wasn't afraid for herself. She had long grown used to being despised, to being called a coward who ran. But Jack, he didn't deserve this. The office door opened softly. Jack stepped in, half out of his white coat, the cuff of his shirt stained faintly with ink from the day's signatures. His face was tired, his eyes unwavering. She turned to him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm leaving. He froze. Leaving where? Anywhere they can't find me. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he laughed. Not out of amusement, but something bitter, restrained. You think disappearing will protect me? His voice was rough, strained, as if every word scraped through him. You're the only reason I still want to exist in this world. She stepped back, eyes shining with tears. Jack, you don't understand. They can destroy you. Sterling Holdings has the power to take your clinic, your name, and everything. I can't let you lose it all because you saved me. He moved closer, his hand curling into a fist. I don't need you to decide my battles. I've lived my whole life behind these white walls in silence. If I lose it all because of you, then for once, I'll lose it for something that proves I'm still human. She shook her head, tears spilling freely. You're being irrational. No, he interrupted softly. Irrational is living without knowing why you're still breathing. A crack of thunder tore through the Boston sky. Rain slammed against the windows, the rhythm matching the pounding in her chest. Lila trembled, not knowing if it was from the cold or the emotion rising like a tide inside her. He stood before her now, only a breath away. Are you afraid? He asked quietly. I'm afraid for you. I'm only afraid of losing you. His voice dropped, his gaze burning, not with fury, but with the desperate clarity of a man who's finally found something worth keeping. He reached out, his hand resting on her shoulder, fingers brushing the thin fabric of her sleeve. Since the day you walked into St. Augustine, he said, my world hasn't been quiet. I thought you were chaos, but maybe that chaos was the first sign I was alive. She shook her head weakly, tears falling onto his wrist. You can't fight them, Jack. They'll crush you. Let them try. His tone was low, forged of steel. Half the office lights went out. Only the glow from the city remained, casting shifting shadows across their faces. She looked at him, the man who once never smiled, now carrying a storm behind his eyes. You're destroying yourself. No, he murmured. I'm setting myself free. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the glass panels like a drum beat. Inside, the space between them dissolved until there was only breath. Jack leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. Not a kiss, but something deeper, more fragile, as if words would ruin it. "If you want to go," he whispered, "I won't stop you. But don't call it protection, because even if you walk away, you'll take the only part of me that still knows how to live." Lila's lips trembled. She nodded through tears she couldn't hold back. Lightning flared across the skyline, reflecting two silhouettes standing close, almost one, against the cold glass. The storm outside was only the beginning. The real tempest was the one rising inside them, a love too fierce to hide, too late to undo, and powerful enough to change everything. The Boston night was a blur of white, erasing every way home. Wind howled through the bare trees, swirling snowflakes around the eaves of St. Augustine like a farewell whisper. In the small room where Lila had been staying, a single desk lamp glowed faintly. She was folding a few things: a worn scarf, a pair of scuffed shoes, and a half-written letter left on the table. The paper trembled in her hands as wind slipped through the door crack. Each line cut through her heart like a blade. "Jack, thank you for saving me. But you deserve peace, not someone who carries trouble wherever she goes." She stopped writing and looked up at the fogged window pane. Outside, the snow fell thicker. The city across the river blurred into white mist. In that frozen reflection, she saw herself, pale, small, and alone. She picked up her bag and opened the door. It closed behind her so softly it barely made a sound. The front yard of St. Augustine lay blanketed in snow. Golden light from the lamps shimmered across the white ground like scattered glitter. Every step she took left a fragile, trembling print. A voice called out from behind, "Lila!" She froze. His voice, low, rough, warm enough to slice through the cold wind. Jack stood there without a coat, snow covering his hair and shoulders, his breath turning to smoke in the night air. The dim light enveloped him, making him appear like a shadow carved out of darkness itself. "If you walk away," he said quietly, "I won't stop you." She turned, tears already streaming before words could form. "Why?" Jack drew in a breath, his eyes flickering with something caught between pain and tenderness. "Because if love becomes a chain," he said softly, "then it isn't love anymore." Lila let out a trembling sound. The wind stung her cheeks, cold enough to burn, but her heart felt aflame. "No, do you know I'm not leaving because I'm afraid to love you?" "I know," he answered, voice gentle. "You're afraid I'll pay the price for loving you." She fell silent, tears mixing with the snow on her face. Everything they'd shared, the sleepless nights, the rumors, the unspoken promises, tightened into the thin distance between them. Jack took a slow step forward, then another. Each one cracked the snow beneath him, quiet and sharp, echoing like her heartbeat. "I used to think I had nothing left to lose," he said, voice steady against the wind. "But then I met you. And I realized peace isn't the absence of pain. It's seeing you breathe, and knowing I still want to stay in this world." She turned fully toward him, her eyes red in the porch light. "You're insane." "Maybe." He smiled faintly, the first smile of the long winter. Silence fell, soft as snow. Only their breaths remained, mingling, ghost-like and fragile. Jack stopped in front of her, raised a hand, not touching, just waiting. "But if you want to stay," he whispered, each word careful, as if afraid the wind might steal it away, "let me be where you stop running." She looked at him, searching for a reason to flee, but found none. Every other path led to fear. This one led to him. She stepped forward. The distance vanished. Wind lifted her hair, brushing against his face. One breath, one heartbeat paused. Then he leaned down, and his lips met hers. The kiss happened in the falling snow. Quiet, unhurried, deep. It felt like a prayer whispered too long, finally released into the world. Their lips were cold, their breath warm, dissolving together like smoke meeting fire for the first time. On the vast white canvas of the night, their two shadows merged into one. Snow covered their shoulders, their hair, all the old wounds and fears that had once kept them apart. Jack drew back slightly, his forehead still resting against hers. His voice trembled. "Don't run anymore." "I'm not," she whispered, her breath brushing his lips. "I just finally know where I belong." That night, Boston was drowned in snow. The whole city slept, except for the faint glow outside the clinic, reflecting two figures standing hand in hand. Two people who had walked through storms, through fear, and found each other in silence. The storm outside hadn't ended, but inside them, it finally had. The news broke on a bleak winter morning in Boston. On the television, between weather alerts and political briefings, a headline scrolled across the screen. St. Augustine under investigation. Allegations of harassment by Dr. Jack Caldwell. A photograph of him in the operating room, face lit by sterile white light, was spliced beside a blurred image of Lila, as if the two of them were proof of some unspoken sin. Calls flooded in. Reporters gathered outside the gates. Letters from the medical board stacked on his desk like layers of snow on a balcony rail. The once impeccable St. Augustine Medical Center, the symbol of control and purity, was sealed off, pending investigation. Jack sat behind the wooden desk in his deserted office. Outside, snow fell soundlessly, like grief held tight. The window reflected his face, still composed but cracked around the eyes. Hannah, the nurse who had always sided with Lila, set the newspaper down in front of him. "They're saying you harassed her," she whispered, voice trembling. Jack didn't flinch. He gave a slow nod, his gaze drifting to the window, where a flock of black crows dipped across the snow like spilled ink. "Let them say what they want," he murmured. "Truth never outruns rumor." That afternoon, Lila entered. Her shoulders shook. In her hand, the official suspension notice trembled like paper soaked in rain. She didn't cry, but her voice broke apart. "You could lose everything because of me." Jack looked up. His eyes held the quiet tension of a man already standing inside his own collapse. He stared at her, not like someone mourning a dream, but like someone choosing a ruin he would gladly call home. "Everything means nothing," he said softly, "without you." The words came out barely audible, but they hit her like a blade wrapped in tenderness. "Jack," she whispered, "you're risking your career, your name." "I've had all that, Lila. Money, status, respect." He stepped closer, voice low, steady. "But I've never had anyone who made me want to walk out of an operating room and actually breathe." He moved around the desk. She stepped back instinctively, yet he stopped half a step away, just enough for their eyes to meet without touching. "You once asked why I'm not afraid of losing," he said quietly. "Because everything I've owned has been cold. But you," his voice caught, "you're the only thing that's warm." Lila let out a trembling laugh through tears. "You talk like I'm a miracle." "No," he replied, almost in a whisper. "You're the only reality I still believe in." Outside, a snow siren wailed somewhere in the distance, sharp and frozen. Inside, the golden light cast his shadow long across the wall, thin, solitary, unbending. "They can strip my name, my clinic, my license," he said, voice low but firm, "but they can't take away the part of me you brought back to life." Lila moved closer, her hand trembling as it brushed the edge of his desk. "I'm not worth losing everything for. You're worth finding myself for." Her tears broke free, unstoppable now. Jack reached out, not to hold, not to claim, but to rest his hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture quiet as a vow. Outside, the world was crumbling, but within that small office, beneath the dim yellow glow and the sound of snow tapping against the glass, something stood untouched, a love that didn't need belief, only endurance. Tomorrow, the headlines would scream again. The clinic would close. The city would whisper about the doctor who fell for a girl. But tonight, as Boston lay buried in white, Jack sat beside her, silent, unbroken, eyes fixed on the falling snow. No longer the man who healed the world, but the one who had finally learned how to heal a single heart. The Boston courtroom blazed under the glare of media lights. Camera flashes burst like gunfire. Microphones clustered like a forest of steel. Outside, melting snow dripped down the courthouse steps, ticking away the seconds before judgment. The press called it the winter trial, the day a doctor once hailed as the city's pride stood against one of America's most powerful dynasties. Plaintiff, Dr. Jack Caldwell. Defendants, Sterling Holdings and Andrew Sterling. The square outside overflowed with people. Protest signs waved above the crowd. Justice for Jack! Expose the Sterlings! Some came for the truth. Most came for the spectacle. Inside, Jack sat upright. No tie, just a plain black vest. The light carved his jawline austere and calm. Across from him sat Andrew Sterling. Gray suit, smile thin as a blade. Exuding the quiet arrogance of a man who believed money could rewrite morality. Beside him, a row of Sterling Holdings lawyers gleamed in their dark robes, silver watches flashing beneath the lights. The judge's voice cut through the murmurs, steady and solemn. The defendants stand accused of fabricating false reports, bribing the press and regulatory offices, and causing severe damage to the reputation and operations of St. Augustine Clinic. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. Andrew's face didn't flicker. Not until the rear doors opened. Lila walked in. She wore a long cream coat, her face pale, her gaze unyielding. The room rippled with whispers. A journalist muttered, "That's her, the runaway Sterling bride." She walked straight to the witness stand, her heels striking the marble floor like a slow drumbeat. When she spoke, her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "My name is Lila Bennett," she said. "I was engaged to Andrew Sterling, at least on paper." The courtroom erupted. Andrew stiffened, jaw tightening. "I was forced into the engagement. Our families wanted to conceal a financial scandal. When I refused, they locked me inside the Sterling estate, confiscated my phone, my passport. I escaped the night of the wedding. Gas filled the room. Cameras swung toward Andrew. He smirked. "She's lying. I have proof." Lila pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to the plaintiff's attorney. Copies of emails and transfer contracts between the two corporations. Numbers blazed in red across the projector screen. A reporter blurted out, "My God, they sold off company shares to bury a scandal." "Order!" the judge thundered. Andrew shot to his feet, voice shaking with fury. "She's a deserter. She's destroying my name, my family's name, for a doctor." Jack stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Honor built on lies," he said evenly, "was never honor at all." The room fell silent. His eyes found hers across the courtroom. And in that instant, everything else disappeared. Lila's eyes shimmered, but her voice no longer wavered. "I'll face the consequences," she said, "but I won't let innocent people pay for the crimes of the powerful." By late afternoon, the verdict was read. The investigation confirmed it. The accusations against Dr. Jack Caldwell were fabricated. Sterling Holdings was ordered to issue a public apology and compensate St. Augustine for damages to its reputation. Andrew Sterling faced additional charges: press manipulation, witness intimidation, and financial misconduct. The courtroom doors swung open. Sunlight poured in, golden and thin like the breath of thawing snow. Reporters surged forward. Flashes, shouts, and applause collided into chaos. Jack stepped out first, face composed. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, Lila waited, his scarf wrapped around her neck. He stopped in front of her, looked into her eyes, and spoke low, his voice cutting through the noise like warmth through frost. "I promised you," he said, "I'd protect you, even if it meant standing against the world." Her tears broke free, shoulders trembling. He smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since the war began. Amid the last traces of snow on the courthouse steps, they stood together, two people who had once lost everything, now left with only each other. And sometimes, justice isn't about winning in court, it's about holding the one you love and knowing you don't have to run anymore. Boston was breathing again. After long months buried beneath ice, the city exhaled its first warmth. The rows of trees outside St. Augustine Medical Center had begun to bud. Cherry blossoms, thin as breath, floated in the wind, brushing the shoulders of those who passed. The small garden behind the building, once buried under snow, now shimmered with pale pink. Lila walked along the path, scattered with petals, fingertips grazing the damp new leaves, still glistening with dew. The faint aroma of coffee drifted through the air, a scent she knew too well, one that made her smile before she even turned around. On the wooden bench beneath the cherry tree, Jack sat quietly, white shirt, steaming coffee in hand. Sunlight spilled through the branches, laying fragments of gold across his shoulders like the sky had begun to melt. "You're up early," he said, voice low and warm as a breeze. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, taking a seat beside him. "I kept thinking about that day the snow melted. It all feels like a dream now." He looked at her, the gray of his eyes still winter cool, but softened by something new. Something that existed only when he looked at her. St. Augustine had reopened 2 months earlier. No more cameras, no headlines, no whispers. The patients had returned, and the staff too. Yet everyone could sense it. Something in the air had changed. Gone was the lone figure walking sterile corridors. Gone was the doctor who moved like a machine. Jack was still precise, still disciplined. But when Lila passed, his gaze followed, quiet and certain, like sunlight finding its way to a window. Footsteps on gravel broke the silence. A figure stood at the garden's edge. Lila turned. An older man in a dark suit, silver hair swept back, eyes so much like her own. Her father. He held his hat in one hand. The wind carried petals between them, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Then his voice came, low, roughened by regret. "We owe you an apology." Lila froze. Her lips trembled, eyes shining wet. "We were wrong," he continued, voice unsteady. "We let wealth and ambition blind us, and forgot that what you needed most was freedom. You chose the right man." He paused, his gaze shifting toward Jack. "He didn't just save your life," he said softly. "He saved your soul." Jack set his coffee aside and stood. He didn't speak, just inclined his head, calm, steady, composed. In that silence, there was more grace than any words could offer. Lila stepped forward and embraced her father. For the first time in years, his arms didn't feel like duty, they felt like home. When he left, the garden was quiet again. Jack sat beside her once more, fingers interlaced. The air was filled with the sound of petals brushing the ground, soft as a sigh. "I used to think," he said quietly, "that love makes people weaker, that letting someone in means losing the strongest part of yourself." He turned to her then, and a faint smile curved his lips, the kind that had taken an entire winter to find. "But you taught me that love is the only thing that makes us strong." Lila looked up at him, eyes shimmering under the spring light. "And you taught me that not every wound means the end. Some wounds are where the light finds its way in." He reached for her hand. His fingers were warm, steady. Above them, the wind stirred again. Thousands of cherry blossoms cascading like a soft pink rain. Far beyond the garden, the city of Boston stirred awake, carrying a new rhythm, the quiet heartbeat of people learning how to begin again. In the garden of St. Augustine, 2 figures walked the petal-covered path, hands entwined, smiles blooming slow as the early sun. The ice had melted, spring had begun, and after everything they remained not because they had escaped the storm, but because they had found each other within it.